Dragon's Dogma is the best 6 out of 10 game I've ever played. This was one of the first comments I saw when I mentioned I'd be playing Dragon's Dogma 1 before Dragon's Dogma 2 released in March of this year. This statement perplexed me initially. It's not a concept that I'm unfamiliar with, but it clashed with my own memories of the game when I played it a decade ago. I never owned and played through Dragon's Dogma of my own volition, though. I had great memories of playing it with a friend at their house. Basically, we ran around the map, we passed the controller back and forth every time we died, and we just went around killing different things. And maybe that's why my opinion of it was never really this 6 out of 10. I always felt that the game was a lot of fun, and that was all it really needed to be. I didn't play much story stuff, and I was just playing the character they made, so I didn't even fully understand how vocations or this game's classes worked, but I knew I was having fun. So much so that later that year, a friend asked me for an RPG recommendation that I guess wasn't mainstream or just wasn't common, and I recommended him Dragon's Dogma. I spoke to him less than a week ago as I'm making this video, a decade after I told him to play it, and he still says it's one of his favorite games of all time, and that he's pumped for Dragon's Dogma 2. So the best 6 out of 10 game just contradicted my memory, but I kept it in mind in my recent playthrough. I considered this my first true playthrough of Dragon's Dogma, and I went into it as blind as possible, so I would be as clueless as I possibly could. Spoilers in the chat forfend. We all know chat can't help themselves. Now, Dragon's Dogma is a game developed by Capcom, directed by Hideaki Itsuno, notably the director of Devil May Cry's 3, 4, and 5. A big favorite of mine, in case you didn't know. It focuses around your created character who becomes marked by a great dragon after it steals your heart. Newly born as the Arisen, you venture through the land slaying great beasts and helping the people in preparation to face the dragon, take your heart back, and save the land. And it gets going real quick. You'll soon be fending off hordes of goblins and wolves, harpies and bandits, ogres and cyclops, griffins and chimeras, and of course, dragons. You'll find dungeons filled with puzzles, dangerous traps, and an unsightly figure or two. You'll embark on quests large and small, escorts and deliveries, hunting and helping, give presents and raise affinity with different NPCs, discover and upgrade weapons and armor. You'll even be accompanied by an ever-rotating array of NPC allies called pawns that can even be shared online for others to use while you reap the benefits. Honestly, the game was so full of life and personality. The gameplay is simple and rewarding. You can climb monsters and disarm or dismember them. Bows, swords, daggers, spells, and so many things in your arsenal that truly make you feel great about how you shape your adventures. All wrapped around a largely fulfilling story, I'll call it that at best, and lore told directly to the player in cutscenes and, of course, through the various locations you visit. I love just getting lost in the world, but not being bogged down by the usual open world riffraff we see in games nowadays. There's no collectible vistas or played out mini games to force me to engage with the world. Simply the promise of adventure and the unknown piquing my curiosity. It is made up of all the elements that RPG lovers come to expect, and my only regret is not playing it sooner. That being said, that 6 out of 10 game statement couldn't be more true. Oh my goodness. Now, Dragon's Dogma wasn't just another game that Hideaki Itsuno directed, but it's largely considered to be his dream come true, his magnum opus, his passion presented in an existing form. He got to fulfill his dream, but it came with costs. Literally. Game dev costs. Dragon's Dogma received but a fraction of its intended budget and had tons of concepts and areas cut from the game, races, just tons of stuff that didn't make it in. The scope of the game was supposed to be way bigger, but also what's there isn't really fleshed out to its maximum potential, other than the combat, which I'd say still holds up a decade later and is really the highlight of the entire game. First off, the world map. Many people are sick of open world games. Many people still love them. Now, Dragon's Dogma feels like this sprawling open world with dangers around every turn. But if you stop and zoom out all the way on the map, it's really small. I mean, you have 2 major cities that you'll visit within the first hour, several watch posts and campsites, and then various corners of the land of Grancis, which isn't that many, to be honest. It feels larger because getting around takes a while, especially in the early game. Fortunately, by endgame, you have 2 major teleport points and can place several more around the map wherever you want them, a system that I really enjoy. The original game didn't enjoy these leisures. You had to walk pretty much everywhere, and it wouldn't be until later that a lot of the teleporting got added in. Now there's even an item that lets you teleport indefinitely, so you don't even need to collect the one-time use ones that were there originally. Even with that, the world still manages to do a lot with the little bit of space it has, comparatively to other games with way bigger areas that do way less with it. But it is small and definitely feels incomplete. By the time you get to the end, you'll wonder where all of the biomes and areas you'd come to expect. I think RPG players, we expect a volcano, a snowy mountaintop, a few different biomes and areas with various enemies that really shake up the experience. And Dragon's Dogma doesn't have that at all. Oh, it has areas that you will 100% remember. I'm looking at you, Soulflayer Canyon, but they're for the way that you end up interacting with the enemies there, not because they're so vastly different that they stand out from everything else in the game. Speaking of which, the enemy variety is equally lacking in most locations around the world, though it definitely does open up later on. I can't tell you the number of times I've killed a wolf, a bandit, a harpy, a goblin, but it's probably 10 times more than anything else I've killed in the game. And then there's variations of the enemy types as well, so hobgoblins and snow harpies and a dire wolf. So that number just keeps going up even as I explore the map. And the number of unique bosses isn't that high either. I've killed so many cyclopses and chimeras that it's kind of ridiculous. Even if I do enjoy fighting them, it's just kind of like, I'm just going to run past that. I don't want to stop and kill that. And that's not that cool when you see this big thing and you're like, I don't want anything to do with that. Not because it's hard, but because I don't want to fight it. Then there's the pawns, which is the game's AI allies I mentioned earlier. Now, this is a single player game, but like I mentioned, you can actually send one of your pawns online and then other people can use it. And then that'll actually earn you a currency that you can use in the base game to hire stronger pawns or in the DLC area, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Now, the AI effectiveness of most games is usually called into question, and here I'm happy to report that pawns can absolutely raffle stomp over the game. They can also be worth about as much as the dirt that they're spending all of their time face first in. It's a good effort all around, but man, can I yell at pawns non-stop. Even when I tell them to do something, when they say they hear me, they sometimes just have a completely different idea of what I mean. You got 3 options: go, come, and help me. And I don't know if they know the difference between them half the time. Then you get to their voice lines. I don't think I've ever played an RPG with more spammy and hilariously quotable and repeatable voice lines. And I love this kind of stuff. I consider it a con because I know most people won't, but I love this stuff. And you can tell that other people do too, because the number of times all of chat was quoting every single thing that came out of a pawn's mouth was staggering. Wolves hunt in packs. Goblins hill like fire and ice. All roads lead to Grand Soren. You won't believe it until you hear it, and even then you might not. And that's not even just true for your pawns. That's true for every NPC you interact with regularly. Pretty much every time you reset to a merchant or an innkeeper, anyone's menu, to do all the options, buy, sell, sleep at the inn, manage storage, they say the same voice line again. You'll know all too well by the end of the game that one merchant has
The master works all, you can't go wrong.
And while I mentioned the story being good in some capacity, it's also very clearly rushed and not fully cohesive at times, probably because of the budget. Some scenes are incredibly in-depth and powerful, one in particular towards the later part of the game with the dragon itself. And some are laughably nonsensical. I literally could not figure out how my character got into this situation based on the decisions I had made up to that point, and why I had any care for the character that I was actually speaking to in the first place, other than me just taking the quest in the first place. The game will jump to a major new story moment in a flash, finishing up here's some random busy work you got to do. We just got told you got to do that. And then, by the way, the entire kingdom's going to burn to the ground. So you better go take care of this other thing. It's like, what? Okay, I guess escalation. Got it. The decisions you make for your character to determine quest outcomes are nice, but there are plenty of times your character just makes decisions that you just can't comprehend, that you don't have a part of. Luckily, the parts you do have a part of are really good And hopefully won't be a problem in Dragon's Dogma 2. And then there's just a series of features and systems that are representative of 2012. And again, the game's clearly, I'd say, unfinished state. Character weight and character customization affecting how much you can carry isn't explained. Third-person camera angles being wonky. That's not new at all. Climbing enemies being super awkward to get your character to move the right way. Animations going stop motions at times. Enemies popping in super late. How stat gains are affected by your current vocation. And so on and so forth. It's crazy to me how much I can sit down, play a game from beginning to end in under a week, spend dozens of hours in it, love that I played it, and at the same time see so much that went wrong. So much that's not just it's an old game and it's got old game jank. No, it's not that simple at all. Dragon's Dogma just has some things that aren't fully realized regardless of how you want to put it. It's not just jank because of when it was made. It's not done. And it's crazy to me that a game that is very clearly not done and was not done when it was, done, is also so good. It's like the biggest contradiction that I've ever seen, which is why that 6 out of 10 statement makes absolute sense. I yelled at this game angrily nonstop, and by the end I was like, that was great, I would do that. I had no regrets, and I was looking for it. I was like, I'll hop into the DLC island, maybe I'll do like New Game Plus. Like, I was looking forward to those things after everything it put me through, after all the yelling I did. And I can't wait for Dragon's Dogma 2 because I sincerely doubt it'll have 90% of these problems. Dragon's Dogma 2 is the fully realized Dragon's Dogma, or at least it should be. While I'm sure they're going to keep some stuff for the sake of hilarity, there better be an NPC that says Masterworks all can't go wrong somewhere in there. I think it would be a huge misstep if they somehow mess this up. They have said and shown so many things that look vastly improved over Dragon's Dogma 1. There's a reason Hideaki Itsuno is making this second game. In fact, he was given the option to make this game years ago. They said Dragon's Dogma 2 or Devil May Cry. And he said, I'm going to do Devil May Cry 5 first, then I'll do Dragon's Dogma 2. And that's exactly what he did. That game was a hit. This game I'm expecting to be a hit, because if a game with this many problems can be this good still, and I can have this much fun and not feel a shred of guilt about it and not feel a shred of guilt recommending it to somebody else, then this game's got to be amazing. I refuse to believe it won't be. You cannot screw this up, Itsuno, please. And that's not even mentioning the Dark Arisen DLC, or I guess they just re-released the game with the Dark Arisen section on it, which is an entirely additional post-game that you get for just going through this labyrinth and all this new endgame gear and upgrades and new bosses. And it's way more interesting and threatening and way more story-focused. And everything about it screams, this is what a more finished Dragon's Dogma feels like, looks like, seems like. And it's in this game. So it's even more perplexing. Like, don't get me wrong, still some of those things I mentioned, they're systematic. Like, you can't fix them just by going into a DLC area, but it's a drastic improvement of a lot of different things going into the Dark Arisen DLC, and well worth the fun of going into it thus far. So I don't know, I'm pumped. I'm excited now that I finished it. And March can't come soon. Like, I just can't believe the start of the year we're getting. I'm going to be playing Granblue at the end of this month, Final Fantasy the end of the next month, and then Dragon's Dogma 2 in like the third week of March. I'm so pumped. But yeah, best 6 out of 10 game I've ever played. I agree. Thanks for watching.